Welcome to Bent Not Broken, where we empower and motivate women by sharing real-life stories of adversity and provide expert advice on how to overcome those obstacles and help you live your best life. Now here's your host, Juanita Kelly.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 12 of Bent Not Broken. I'm your host, Juanita Kelly. Nothing is harder than finding your strength to start again after you suffered a loss. Loss is individual, and each one of us react differently to it. There's no timetable or mapped out road that you should take to heal your pain. When I experienced my loss, I had no one to turn to. I felt alone and discouraged. Those emotions were constant, and they filled my life from morning to night. Healing was painful. And sometimes when I thought I had worked through the loss, I was hit with a trigger, and everything came crashing down on top of me all over again. What do you do when you have lost something that's dear to you? Where do you turn? How do you cope? On today's episode, we'll be talking about healing from loss with author, speaker, and coach Alison Pena. Today's episode is entitled, Finding Your Inner Strength. We'll be right back. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bent Not Broken podcast. Today we have Alison Pena. She is known as the Bad Widow. Alison suffered a devastating loss of her husband, David, to pancreatic cancer. She channeled her grief into hard work, and today she helps those like her who have gone through loss, that have upended their life and shaken themselves at their roots. And she's really starting this positive change in other people's lives. Her clients includes widows and widowers dealing with the loss of their significant others, as well as professionals and entrepreneurs who have lost businesses or confidence and are feeling down about their future. Alison, welcome.
Thank you so much.
I love your story. I am so amazed at how you overcome this huge loss. It was just tremendous. Tell us a little bit about your husband, David.
So my husband was a painter, a professional painter. And so when he died, he left me about 1,000 paintings, and he never got rid of anything. So they were not all saleable. So one of the things I faced early on is how to close up his studio, how to bring the paintings home, how to deal with them. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in October of 2015, and he died in my arms at home in September of 2016.
Wow.
Yep.
So let's go back a little bit further. How did you meet David?
I met him at a time in my life when I was just fed up with everything. I didn't like my work. All the men I was meeting were awful, and I was completely fed up. And so I went to a church retreat. I was on the leadership of this church retreat, and all the way up in the car, I complained. 2 hours. 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, we get out of the car, and my girlfriend says to me, what you need in your life is a serious relationship. And I said, are you crazy? Have you not been listening to me whine for 2 hours? And she said, well, you should go over and talk to that one. And there was this new guy sitting in a lawn chair. And I said, why would I want to do that? But that evening, he was just sitting around, and we were at the Delaware Water Gap. And I thought, well, let's see what happens. Let me go and talk to this guy and see what happens. And I said, well, why don't we go down to the dock and talk? And I'm thinking, moonlight, romance. And there were these two guys, and they were fishing for an eel for their grandmother, family reunion. And they knew everything about all the fish they were pulling out of this river. And so there was no romance, but it was hilarious. And we talked through the night. And at about 5 o'clock in the morning, I had groups to lead in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, we should really go to sleep. And he looked at me and he said, or we could go and lie on the dock and watch the sunrise.
Oh, that's so romantic.
Mm-hmm. And it's like a bell went off in my head, and I thought,
this is the one.
This is the one.
Yes.
This is the one. So that's how I met him.
Mm-hmm.
It took 4.5 years for him to come to the same realization.
It happens sometimes, though.
Exactly. And then we were married for We were together for 25 years. We missed our 20th wedding anniversary by 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about your wedding day.
We got married in New York City at the church that he was baptized in.
Mm-hmm.
And I got dressed at my sister's apartment, which was about 10 blocks away, and there was a car waiting to take me to the church. But I decided to walk. So I walked 7 blocks in my wedding dress with my bridesmaids and stuff around me, basically holding up the train. And it was the most fun ever.
Sounds beautiful.
And then we got married, and he looked at me like, it was Christmas, New Year's, Hanukkah, everything. And we began.
What a wonderful story. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. What happened? How did your husband get the diagnosis?
He had been in pain for 2 or 3 months before he was diagnosed. And we went to the ER twice. We went to urgent care 3 times. We went to see multiple doctors. And finally, one of the doctors said, get a CAT scan, which I don't know why that didn't happen months before. And the following Monday, it was October 12th. You don't forget these things. They said, you need to come in and see us right now. Now, when a doctor says that, it's not good news. It's never good news. And he said, we think that you have pancreatic cancer. And so go and get tests, go and see an oncologist right away. And I remember being in Rite Aid and calling the oncologist he had recommended and saying, we need to see you today. And they said, you can get an appointment in 3 weeks. I'm like, no. It's today.
Yeah, today.
Because the lifespan for pancreatic cancer is typically 6 weeks to 4 months.
Oh, my. What were you thinking when they said that this is a possibility as to what has been causing him discomfort? Were you thinking this is going to be over soon, or were you nervous? Did you have a lot of anxiety and fear that started to come, creep up on you?
The anxiety and fear came when I Googled pancreatic cancer.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So cancer in itself, there's so many different kinds of cancer, and some of them usually kill and some of them don't. So I didn't know what it looked like, except they basically said, get your affairs in order. If you don't have a will, get it done.
Mm-hmm.
Like this week.
Mm-hmm.
And those kinds of things are absolutely terrifying. What we decided to do, and the doctors, they said, you're going to get more tired, so you should just slow down. So you should do less. You should make your life smaller. And for us, that made no sense. So what we decided to do instead, because we knew that his life was going to end sooner rather than later, our life together was going to end sooner rather than later. And so we started just living,
Mm-hmm.
Just fearlessly, because when you're facing down death and when you're watching the person you love most in the world go from, was 6'3", I'm 5'3".
Okay.
He was 263 pounds and went down to 146.
Oh my goodness.
So, I was literally watching him shrink away from me across these months. What we decided to do was live. In the face of death, we decided to live. So he continued painting. He finished his last commissioned painting the Thursday before the Saturday he died.
Okay.
I had always wanted to speak on stages about the work I do and to sing on stages, do cabaret.
Mm-hmm.
So I signed up for some cabaret workshops, and I sang on 4 stages in those 11 months. The last one was the Tuesday before he died.
Wow.
The first song I sang, because it's really important to remind yourself that you're not just a caregiver, not just a widow, not just a person who's suffered a loss. Each of us, every single person, is much more than that. But it's easy to forget when such an experience is going on. And so it reminded me, that Tuesday before he died, the first song I sang was Gloria Gaynor, I Will Survive. And the last song was called The Secret of Happiness, which was about living in the now.
Mm-hmm.
What we have is the present, with ourselves, with each other. And so if we're not living full tilt boogie into that, it's a missed opportunity.
Yes. Now, let's fast forward to the day that David passed. I was reading that you heard the song from Ghost.
Yep.
Share that experience. When you heard that song in the morning, tell me what you were thinking.
Oh, I mean, the thing that I thought was today's the day. I knew that day was the day. And I was under a lot of pressure from family and friends to put him into hospice. And what we really wanted was for him to die at home, for it just to be the two of us. And I had a lot of people saying, well, you can't handle it if you won't be able to handle it. And I said, you have no idea what I can handle.
Mm-hmm.
You have no idea. And basically I backed them off because for me in hospitals, and especially with a diagnosis of cancer, there's a lot of fear, grief, anger, all of that there. And I could keep our home filled with love. And we had spent a lot of time practicing filling up with love. So when we would get really scared, I created this little meditation, filling from the tips of the toes up to the top of the head with love. And so that last morning, I heard that song and I took him in my arms. His head was on my shoulder. And I said, in a body, you need breath and love. Outside a body, you just need love. So when you're ready, go out on the love. And he asked me a lot of questions. What about my mom? What about my paintings? What about this? What about that? And I'm like, I've got it. And at the end, in my arms, on 4 breaths, he went out on the love.
What a wonderful story.
It was amazing.
And you stayed with him, you and him after he passed, with his body. And
Yep.
And how some people will think of that and see that as, oh, I couldn't do that. But I have to commend you because that just shows me the level of love and care and concern that you wanted to spend this time with your husband, just you and him. And then, I had read a little bit further in your story, and I understand that you called for the medical team to come and to retrieve him. And there was some time lapse. It was even longer than what you had anticipated.
Yeah. He died September 10th, 2016 at 10:10 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not call them until about 1:30.
Mm-hmm.
And then they arrived around 4 o'clock.
Okay.
But a friend told me, because he died, and I thought, okay, I've got to call this person, I've got to call that person, I've got to get to, and this person who's a medical doctor, friend of mine, said, you don't have to call anyone until you're ready. And that taking the time I needed just to be there, with myself and with him, without anyone else, was such a gift. And it was sad.
Mm-hmm.
I was a wife, and then 4 breaths later, I was a widow. Shocking.
Yeah. How was the first year after he passed?
Wasteland of grief is kind of how I described it. So the first year for me was being quite numb. I had the attention span of a fruit fly. I had gaps in my memory that you could drive a truck through. And I had really variable energy for doing stuff, energy for connecting with people, all of it. And there were times when, the memory loss was particularly disturbing. There were times when I honestly felt like I was going crazy. And it was really hard to care about my life, about going forward in my life, because I had my life planned out. I'd been with this man for 25 years. I was going to be with this man till pretty much the end of my life, and that was it. And so the script was written, and then it was torn up.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I looked at the future, there was nothing there. There was no horizon where I could see that there would be some other experience than this wasteland of grief. It's a lot. I mean, I would cry when I was peeling carrots.
Oh, I can only imagine. So the grief just kind of consumes you. It fills up your day, your night, every second that you're existing, you're dealing with some sort of loneliness or some sort of sensation of sadness. How did you take that feeling and motivate yourself to start to overcome the grief?
Yeah, a Bad Widow began because I couldn't find the resources that I needed. So there were plenty of resources for how do you handle the logistics? How do you manage your finances? How do you declutter? Those kinds of things. There was a lot out there for that. There were things about how do you move through your feelings, quite a lot about that. There wasn't, okay, here I am in this wasteland of grief. How do I solve for these things? There was going through them, but how do I literally take these breakdowns I'm going through and come up with a solution? So, for example, I had about 5 seconds from remembering that I was hungry to getting to the kitchen to get food. So I put baskets of food around my whole house, so I didn't have to depend on my memory. So there were all these different things that I did. I would encounter something that didn't work for me. I once went out and walked 2 blocks in my slippers, and the only reason I was going to an appointment, the only reason I looked down and noticed I was wearing slippers instead of shoes was because my heels were cold because the wind was blowing on them.
Wow. So you were like just dazed. You were just kind of just living, existing.
Just existing. And
Wow.
So then a little note went up by the door, and it said, keys, coat, shoes.
Like little safety nets for yourself.
Little safety nets. I'm a huge fan of nets, but it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot for the person going through it, and it's a lot for the person around them who are trying to figure out, how do I be around someone in this state? And also, how do I support a person who's going through this? And the second year was like, I could go from 0 to full on rage in about 5 seconds.
Wow.
And that is also not that comfortable to be around for anybody. But it's my nature, that I started building Bad Widow Consulting out of this tipping point moment, sort of in the second year. The first year was pretty much all numb. But in the second year, my longing got bigger than my fear. So I wanted to begin building a bigger life. I had no idea how to do it, but I wanted it. And at that point, I began really looking at each breakdown for its solution and showing other people this, and it worked for them. And the rest was kind of a rolling ball.
So it's interesting. You took your lack of energy, your memory problems, your utter unadulterated sadness, and you started a business. And
I did.
You took that to help other people who were experiencing the same things that you were experiencing. So when you opened the doors for Bad Widow and you started getting clients, what were you noticing that the men and women that were coming to you as a widow or a widower, they were coming to you and they're saying, this is what I'm dealing with? What were you noticing, the things that you were telling them that were beneficial to them, that were actually helping them to progress and to move forward?
one of the things that makes what I do unique is that I'm really looking to move them from where they are through this passage of after loss the most effective way, right? So what I discovered was that there were kind of three places that everyone found themselves in after any loss. The first was you contract your life. You know, you kind of need to make your world smaller in order to have the time and space to heal. So once you're ready to push out against that, you have to re-engage. And when you're accustomed to smaller, that's not an automatic process.
Yes.
That's actually a set of practices that you need to begin stepping into to make a bigger life. And as I said, it's when the longing gets bigger than the fear, that's when people are ready. The second piece I call reinvent. So the person you are before your loss with that person is not the same person you are after. And so it's a real mistake to say, I just want what I had. Because the bottom line is, you will never have that again. I was with my husband 25 years. After his death, I have that as history and as love. I would never have that again. The thing that's powerful about this is that as long as you're hearkening back to what you had and wanting that, you're standing on quicksand. Once you go, I'm a new person. That is all part of me, of my history, but I am now this person after my loss.
You know what it reminds me of? You give me a vision of a phoenix rising from the ashes and being born again, not staying in the same situation, but rising out of it anew. I think that's beautiful.
Exactly. And then you can start going, okay, I am after this loss. So I was a wife and then I was a widow. But what was a widow? I mean, I'd never been one before. I didn't actually know. And so bad widow was, I don't really like the assumptions that people are making about me, the models that people have for what a widow is and how she should behave. So I'm making my own. So that was bad widow. And so then that's, who are you now? What do you like? What kind of people do you like being around? What kind of activities do you like doing? And then the last piece is, in the face of a loss, people going through a loss and after a loss, there are a lot. And it goes on for way longer than anyone wants it to.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the face of that, there are people who get so uncomfortable that they step out of your lives. And if it's a spouse that you've lost, the gap that they leave in your support system is so huge that it would take like 100 people to fill it. And people you've counted on have left. So rebuild is about, okay, as you've looked at who you are, what you like, what activities you want to do, what kind of work do you want to be fulfilling. Rebuild is, who do you need in your networks right now? What I realized, because my need for support was so vast, was that typically we think of tending our networks only in business. You know, is your network feeding you referrals? But we exist in networks throughout our entire life, and we don't take care of all the other pieces. Who are you going to go to an exercise class who likes the same kind of exercise? Who are you going out with drinks with? Who is okay with tears?
Mm-hmm.
Who can you scale your business with? We don't do everything with the same people. Oh, the other thing that's really important about networks after a loss is, if you don't have a pretty solid network or build a pretty solid network, a person in the face of a loss is a lot to handle. And so if you have very few people in your network, a lot is landing on those 3 to 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you have more people, you can spread out the care. You can have more people to ask for stuff, so you're not asking very few people for a lot. And so that's another way to get more robust support.
Now, let's fast forward a little bit further. You got back into the dating world after your husband passed. Tell me about the situation that you had when you first said, it's time for me to kind of put myself out there and start dating again. How was that like?
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. So the last time I dated, I met my husband in 1992. So the last time I dated was 1992. It was 2018. And I was a hot mess. I was crying randomly. I couldn't imagine being intimate with anyone except my husband. But I made this decision that I was entitled to 2 epic love affairs. And I decided that the way I was going to find my second epic love affair was to get on an online dating app. Didn't exist in 1992, pretty much. And start interacting with people, basically learning to flirt again, and interacting with men who liked doing the same stuff I did. And just start acclimating myself. Now, I couldn't trust my body chemistry because anyone who was not my husband felt wrong.
Mm-hmm.
If the arm went around my waist at a certain height, didn't feel right. So I had a literal revulsion to being touched. Pretty hard to date with that going on, right?
Yeah.
But I began, and basically I hacked the dating app I used to make it serve me in the way that I wanted to. So I wrote my profile to describe myself as clearly as I could. So people who weren't my people would deselect themselves, and people who were would be able to find me.
So you were very clear and concise as to what you thought of yourself and what your expectations of a partner was.
Oh, no.
No?
I had no idea. I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just had this model of this 25-year relationship, but I didn't know really what I liked. Certainly, I didn't know what I would like in an intimate partner.
I see.
So it was a matter of exploring.
Mm-hmm.
As I was texting between people, well, do I like how this person is talking to me? I'm a huge fan of making distinctions, because if you can make distinctions, then you know what you do next. So I would put up my profile, put up my photos, and then see what responses I got. If I didn't like the responses I was getting, I changed the profile.
I see.
And then I got better. By the time I actually met anyone, I never went out with a guy who wasn't awesome. And I found the man who's my boyfriend now in 6 months.
6 months, that's amazing. So now, how did you open up with your new partner about your experiences with losing your first husband, David?
In the profile, I included that I was a widow, because if that was something that they were not interested in dealing with, then I did not even want to bother with them. The other thing I did was that I had to be very clear in my communication, both with myself and with him. I had to ask myself, when I had this visceral body reaction that was not always great, was it me, was it him, or was it us? The power of making distinctions is then you know what to do next. If it was me, I had to deal with me. If it was him, that was a conversation. And if it was us, then that was something for us to resolve together.
Mm-hmm. What's one piece of advice that you would give our listeners who have lost a loved one and they think that they're ready to put themselves out there and start opening themselves up to find love again?
Yeah, my first recommendation is, when the longing gets bigger than the fear, take a step outside your comfort zone.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, Alison, your story is it's tremendous. And you shared some really, really thought-provoking insights today. How can our listeners find more information about you and even book a session with you?
If you go to badwidow.com, you can find me and you can talk to me.
Awesome. So Alison Pena is at www.badwidow.com. Are you on any other social media sites?
Pretty much all of them. Facebook and LinkedIn as Alison Pena, Instagram and Twitter as Bad Widow Online. But if you put Alison Pena and Bad Widow together, you will find me.
That's wonderful. Alison, I appreciate your time today and the time you've taken to share such a lovely story of transformation and growth. And I appreciate everything that you've done. And I'd love to see what's going to happen with the rest of your epic love story, your great second love story. I want to know how it's going to play out. It's wonderful. All right, then, Alison. It's been great talking to you. Have a nice one. Thank you for joining us.
You too. Thanks.
On the next episode of Bent Not Broken, we talk about ending trauma cycles with best-selling author and therapist Rihanna Milne. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
This has been Bent Not Broken with Juanita Kelly. Thanks for listening. You can find us online at www.bentnotbroken.co, all major podcast platforms and YouTube. Be sure to follow us on social media at Bent Not Broken Podcast.